Orion Sutton knew from the moment the bullet tore through his abdomen that his future had changed forever. It was 1882, and the dusty streets of Tahlequah, Oklahoma had seen their fair share of blood. But this time it wasn't just another gunfight, it was the end of a dream he hadn't even realized he'd been nurturing. The sun beat down mercilessly as Orion rode into town, his chestnut stallion kicking up clouds of dust that seemed to hang suspended in the still summer air. At 32, he'd spent more than half his life driving cattle across the plains, his skin weathered by sun and wind, his eyes constantly scanning horizons that never seemed to end. But something had changed in him over the past few months, a restlessness that even the wide open spaces couldn't soothe. "Mighty hot day," remarked the livery stable owner as Orion dismounted. "You planning on staying a while this time, Sutton, or just passing through like always?" Orion handed over the reins, his expression thoughtful. "Might stay a bit longer this time, Jefferson. Got some thinking to do." Jefferson nodded, not pressing for details. That was the way of things out here. A man's business was his own unless he chose to share it. "Well, your usual room at the boarding house should be available. Mrs. Finch always keeps it ready, just in case." Orion nodded his thanks and collected his saddlebags. His boots raised little puffs of dust as he made his way down Tahlequah's main street. The town had grown since he'd first visited nearly a decade ago, when it was little more than a trading post with ambitious plans. Now it boasted a proper bank, a schoolhouse, and even a doctor's office that wasn't just the back room of the general store. He hadn't planned on going to see Doc Mitchell right away, but something about passing the small white building with its freshly painted sign made him pause. The diagnosis he'd received in Kansas City 2 months ago still burned in his mind like a brand. "Sterile," the fancy doctor had said, after examining the old wound from a Comanche arrow that had pierced him low in the belly years before. "The damage is permanent, I'm afraid. You'll never father children." The words shouldn't have affected him so profoundly. He'd never given much thought to having a family. His life on the move didn't exactly lend itself to settling down. Yet somehow, learning that the choice had been taken from him felt like losing something precious he hadn't known he possessed. Orion hesitated only a moment before turning toward the doctor's office. He'd get a second opinion, he decided. Not that he expected a different answer, but perhaps hearing it again would help him accept it. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and a woman's voice called out from the back room, "I'll be with you in just a moment." Orion removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair as he waited. He was expecting Doc Mitchell, not the young woman who emerged from behind a curtain, wiping her hands on a clean towel. Her honey-brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though a few wayward strands had escaped to frame her face. She wore a simple blue dress with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, and her eyes, a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold, regarded him with professional interest. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice warm but businesslike. "I'm Lydia Blackburn. How can I help you today?" Orion found himself momentarily at a loss for words. "I was looking for Doc Mitchell," he finally managed. Her expression softened slightly. "I'm afraid Dr. Mitchell passed away 3 months ago. Pneumonia. I've taken over his practice." She gestured to a framed certificate on the wall. "I trained at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. I assure you I'm qualified to treat whatever ails you, Mr. Sutton. Orion Sutton." He hesitated, suddenly uncomfortable with the idea of discussing his private condition with this young woman. "And nothing's ailing me exactly. I was just looking for a second opinion on something." Dr. Blackburn nodded, gesturing toward a chair. "Please, sit down and tell me about it. Second opinions are an important part of medicine." There was something in her manner, a quiet confidence without arrogance, that put him slightly more at ease. Orion sat down, turning his hat in his hands. "I saw a doctor in Kansas City about an old injury," he began, keeping his eyes on his hat. He told me that I can't have children because of the injury. If Dr. Blackburn was surprised or embarrassed by his revelation, she didn't show it. "May I ask about the nature of the injury?" she inquired, her tone remaining professional. "Arrow wound. About 7 years back. Caught me low, right side." He gestured vaguely toward his abdomen. "Got infected something fierce before I found help." Dr. Blackburn nodded thoughtfully. "And the doctor in Kansas City, what specifically did he say was the problem?" "Said the infection caused scarring that blocked things." Orion felt heat rise to his face. "Said I'm sterile." "I see." She considered this for a moment. "Would you allow me to examine you? I'd need to see the wound site and possibly conduct a more thorough examination to give you my honest assessment." Orion hesitated, then nodded. If he wanted answers, he'd have to set aside his discomfort. Dr. Blackburn was professional and efficient in her examination. Her touch clinical as she studied the scar tissue and asked questions about his health and the original treatment of the wound. When she finished, she washed her hands thoroughly before facing him again. "Mr. Sutton, medicine isn't always an exact science," she said carefully. "While there is clearly damage from both the wound and the infection, I wouldn't be so quick to pronounce an absolute verdict on your ability to father children." Orion looked up sharply. The Kansas City doctor seemed pretty certain. "Many doctors are overly confident in their diagnoses," she replied with a small smile. "The human body is remarkably resilient and capable of healing in ways we don't fully understand. I've seen cases where patients defied much more definitive prognosis than yours." A flicker of hope sparked in Orion, though he tried to suppress it. "So you're saying there's a chance?" "I'm saying I wouldn't rule it out entirely." She paused, studying him. "Though I'm curious most unmarried men, I know, would consider your diagnosis a blessing rather than a concern." The observation caught him off guard. "I suppose I just don't like being told what I can and can't do," he said after a moment, though they both knew it wasn't the whole truth. Dr. Blackburn nodded, accepting his answer without pressing further. "Well, Mr. Sutton, my professional opinion is that while your injury has certainly created complications, declaring you permanently unable to father children is premature." As Orion left the doctor's office, he felt lighter somehow, though he tried to remind himself not to put too much stock in her words. She was young, after all, and perhaps optimistic where the Kansas City doctor had been pragmatic. Still, something about Dr. Blackburn's confident manner stayed with him as he made his way to Mrs. Finch's boarding house. The following morning found Orion at the town's only cafe, nursing a cup of coffee as he considered his next move. He'd come to Tahlequah with the vague idea of possibly settling down, buying a small ranch, perhaps, after years of working other men's cattle. Now he wasn't sure what to do. Part of him wanted to believe Dr. Blackburn, to hang on to the possibility that he might someday have a family. Another part warned against building hopes on such uncertain ground. "Mind if I join you?" The voice startled him from his thoughts, and he looked up to find Dr. Blackburn standing beside his table, a cup of tea in hand. "Please," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. She sat down gracefully, setting her cup on the table. "I hope I'm not intruding. It's just that I don't know many people in town yet, and it's nice to see a face I recognize." "You're new to Tahlequah?" Orion asked, realizing he knew almost nothing about her. "Arrived 6 weeks ago," she confirmed. "When I heard about Dr. Mitchell's passing, it seemed like an opportunity. There aren't many places willing to accept a female physician." Orion nodded. "Must be difficult." "It can be," she acknowledged, "though I've found that most people care more about whether you can help them than about what you look like doing it." She took a sip of her tea. "And you? Are you passing through or staying?" "Undecided," Orion admitted. "Been on the move most of my life. Getting tired of it, I suppose. There's something to be said for putting down roots, Lydia said, her eyes meeting his briefly before looking away. Though I imagine after a lifetime of freedom, it might feel confining. Maybe, Orion agreed. Or maybe it's its own kind of freedom. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Shouts and the sound of running feet drew their attention to the window, where they could see people rushing toward the bank. Something's wrong, Orion said, rising quickly. Stay here. But Lydia was already on her feet. If someone's hurt, they'll need a doctor. Before he could argue, she was heading for the door, and Orion had no choice but to follow. Outside, they found a growing crowd gathered around the bank. Through the gaps between onlookers, Orion could see 3 men on horseback, bandanas pulled up over their faces, guns drawn. Bank robbery, someone in the crowd murmured. Orion instinctively reached for his gun, then remembered he'd left it in his room at the boarding house. He'd been trying to leave that life behind, to stop being the man who was always ready for trouble. Now he cursed himself for the decision. The bank door burst open, and 2 more masked men emerged, carrying bulging sacks. They mounted quickly as the sheriff emerged from his office down the street, revolver in hand. "Stop right there," the sheriff called. But the robbers were already spurring their horses. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. One of the robbers turned in his saddle, raising his pistol. The sheriff fired first, the shot going wide. The robber returned fire just as Orion spotted a young boy, no more than 10, who had wandered into the street, directly in the line of fire. Without thinking, Orion lunged forward, tackling the child to the ground as a bullet whistled overhead. They rolled together, the boy crying out in fear as Orion shielded him with his body. When they came to a stop, Orion felt a searing pain in his side. "Are you hurt, boy?" he managed to ask. The child shook his head, eyes wide with fear and awe. "No, sir. You saved me." Orion tried to sit up, but the pain intensified, and he became aware of a warm wetness spreading across his shirt. Looking down, he saw the crimson stain blooming from his abdomen. "Mr. Sutton." Lydia was suddenly beside him, her face tight with concern as she saw the blood. "You're shot." "Appears so," Orion agreed, trying to keep his voice steady despite the pain. "We need to get him to my office," Lydia called out, her professional demeanor taking over. "Someone help me carry him." Several men stepped forward, and Orion found himself being lifted onto a makeshift stretcher fashioned from a store counter. The pain was becoming more intense with each passing moment, and by the time they reached the doctor's office, darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision. Lydia worked quickly, cutting away his shirt to reveal the wound. "The bullet's still inside," she said, more to herself than to Orion. "I need to remove it before infection sets in." Through a haze of pain, Orion watched as she prepared her instruments, her movements swift and precise. "This is going to hurt," she warned him, offering a leather strap to bite down on. "But I need you to stay as still as possible." Orion nodded, taking the strap between his teeth. Their eyes met for a moment, and he saw both determination and compassion in her gaze before the pain overtook him. He drifted in and out of consciousness as Lydia worked, vaguely aware of her voice giving calm instructions to someone assisting her. At one point, he thought he heard her say, "The bullet's dangerously close to where his previous injury was," but he couldn't be sure if it was real or part of the fevered dreams that began to take hold. When Orion finally regained full consciousness, the room was dim, lit only by a single lamp. Night had fallen, and for a disoriented moment, he couldn't remember where he was or what had happened. Then the pain in his abdomen brought it all rushing back. "You're awake." Lydia's voice came from beside the examination table where he lay. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but relieved. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," Orion replied, his voice rough. A small smile touched her lips. "Well, your sense of humor is intact, at least." Orion tried to sit up, but she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, keeping him in place. "Not yet. You've lost a lot of blood, and the bullet did considerable damage. But you got it out?" She nodded, holding up a small, misshapen piece of metal. "It was lodged against your pelvis, very near your old injury site. You were lucky an inch to the left, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Orion let his head fall back against the pillow. "The boy? Is he all right?" "Tommy Miller is just fine, thanks to you," Lydia assured him. "His mother has been here twice already to check on you. Half the town is calling you a hero." "Not much of a hero," Orion muttered. "A real hero would have stopped the robbers." "You saved a child's life," Lydia countered firmly. "That's heroic enough by any measure." There was something in her expression as she looked at him, a warmth that went beyond professional concern that made Orion glance away, suddenly self-conscious. "How long will I be laid up?" he asked, changing the subject. "At least a week before you should even think about getting out of bed," she said. "And several weeks of taking it easy after that. The bullet tore through muscle and nicked your intestine. I've repaired the damage, but healing takes time." Orion frowned. "I can't stay here in your office for weeks." "No," Lydia agreed. "But once you're stable enough to move, we can transfer you to Mrs. Finch's. I'll check on you there daily." The mention of Mrs. Finch reminded Orion of something. "My thing's my room, already taken care of," Lydia assured him. "Sheriff Watson collected your belongings from Mrs. Finch's and brought them here. He also took statements from witnesses about the robbery. The gang got away, but they're hoping to track them." Orion nodded, feeling a wave of fatigue wash over him. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving my life." Lydia's expression softened. "It's what I do, Mr. Sutton. Now get some rest. Your body needs it to heal." As Orion drifted back to sleep, his last thought was that maybe getting shot wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. At least it had given him a reason to stay in Tahlequah a while longer. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of pain, sleep, and Lydia's constant care. She seemed to always be there when he woke, checking his wound, changing bandages, helping him drink broth or water. Despite the circumstances, Orion found himself looking forward to these moments, to the gentle touch of her hands and the sound of her voice as she spoke to him. "You should be resting too," he told her on the third day, noticing the fatigue that lined her face. "You can't be taking care of the whole town and spending all night watching over me." "I've canceled all but emergency appointments," she admitted. "And Mrs. Finch has been bringing meals for both of us. The town understands." "Why?" Orion asked, genuinely puzzled. "I'm just a drifter who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." Lydia gave him a look that suggested he was being deliberately obtuse. "You saved a child's life, Mr. Sutton. That means something to people here. Besides, I take my responsibilities as a doctor seriously." "Orion," he said suddenly. She blinked. "Pardon. My name. It's Orion. If you're going to be saving my life and seeing me in my undergarments, you might as well use my given name." A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she nodded. "Orion, then. And you should call me Lydia." On the fifth day, when Lydia deemed him stable enough to move, several townsmen arrived to carefully transport Orion to Mrs. Finch's boarding house. The older woman had prepared a ground floor room for him, sparing him the need to navigate stairs during his recovery. "You just focus on getting well, Mr. Sutton," Mrs. Finch said as they settled him into the bed. "We'll take good care of you." True to her word, Lydia visited daily, sometimes twice, to check his wound and monitor his recovery. As the days passed and Orion's strength gradually returned, their conversations lengthened, shifting from his physical condition to more personal topics. He learned that Lydia was 28, the daughter of a country doctor in Pennsylvania who had encouraged her interest in medicine from an early age. After her father's death, she had used her small inheritance to attend medical school, facing considerable resistance as one of the few women in the program. "Why Tahlequah?" he asked one afternoon as she changed his bandages. "Why not stay back east where they're more used to lady doctors?" Lydia's hands paused momentarily before resuming their work. "I wanted to go somewhere I was needed," she said. "Somewhere I could make a difference. The territories have too few doctors of any kind." She hesitated. "And perhaps I wanted to prove something to myself as much as to anyone else. That you could succeed where others thought you couldn't?" She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Something like that. What about you? How does a man end up spending his life driving cattle across the plains?" Orion shrugged, wincing slightly at the pull on his wound. "Fell into it, I suppose. My father died when I was 15, left my mother with 5 children and a failing farm in Missouri. I headed west looking for work, ended up on a cattle drive. Been doing it ever since." "And your family now?" "Mother passed on 10 years back. My brothers and sisters are scattered, one brother in California, a sister in Colorado, the others still in Missouri. We write sometimes, but it's been years since I've seen any of them." "That sounds lonely," Lydia observed, her eyes meeting his briefly. "Never thought of it that way," Orion said, though her words resonated with a truth he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. "Always figured I was free. Perhaps there's a middle ground," she suggested as she finished tying off his fresh bandage. "Between complete freedom and deep roots." Their conversations became something Orion looked forward to each day, a bright spot in the monotony of recovery. He found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about the beauty of the open plains under starlight, the terror of stampedes, the camaraderie around campfires. In turn, Lydia told him about her struggles in medical school, her dreams for the future, her belief in the body's capacity to heal itself given the right conditions. "That's why I wasn't so quick to agree with your Kansas City doctor," she explained one evening. "I've seen too many impossibilities proven wrong." As the weeks passed and Orion's wound gradually healed, he began to venture outside, first just to sit on Mrs. Finch's porch, then for short walks through town. Often, Lydia would accompany him during her afternoon break, their pace slow to accommodate his still recovering body. "You're making excellent progress," she told him during one such walk, about a month after the shooting. "The wound is healing cleanly, and you're regaining your strength. Soon you'll be well enough to decide what's next." The observation, though accurate, struck Orion with unexpected force. What was next? Before the shooting, he'd been contemplating settling down somewhere, possibly in Tahlequah. Now, the idea of leaving, of not seeing Lydia daily, created an emptiness he wasn't prepared for. "I've been thinking about that," he said carefully. "There's a small ranch for sale just outside town. Nothing fancy, but good water and decent grazing. Might be a place to start something new." Lydia's expression remained neutral, but he thought he detected a flicker of something in her eyes. "That sounds promising. Are you seriously considering it?" "More than considering," Orion admitted. "I rode out there yesterday with Jefferson from the livery. Made an offer." Now her surprise was evident. "You did? That's wonderful, Orion. I think it would suit you." "Do you?" he asked, suddenly unsure. "I've never stayed in one place more than a few months at a time. Don't know if I have what it takes to put down those roots we talked about." Lydia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "I think you have more capacity for roots than you realize. The way you've connected with people here, how quickly you've become part of the community that suggests you've been ready for this for some time." Her words warmed something in him, a space that had been cold for longer than he cared to remember. "Maybe you're right," he said softly. "Maybe it is time." 2 days later, Orion received word that his offer on the ranch had been accepted. The news filled him with both excitement and trepidation. He immediately went to Lydia's office to share the development, finding her between patients. "Congratulations," she said warmly when he told her. "When will you take possession?" "End of the week," Orion replied. "There's a lot to be done. The place has been sitting empty for months. Buildings need repairs. Fences need mending. I'll need to hire some help, buy some cattle to start building a herd." "It sounds like you have a plan," Lydia observed, a hint of pride in her voice. "Part of one, anyway," Orion admitted, "though I'm still figuring out the rest as I go." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lydia's next patient. But before Orion left, he hesitated at the door. "I was wondering if you might like to come out to the ranch once I'm settled. Sunday, perhaps? I could make dinner." Lydia's surprise quickly gave way to a pleased smile. "I'd like that very much." The days leading up to Orion taking possession of the ranch were filled with preparations. He purchased supplies, hired 2 local men with ranching experience to help with repairs, and began making plans for the cattle he would acquire. Throughout it all, thoughts of Lydia were never far from his mind. He wasn't sure exactly when his feelings for her had shifted from gratitude to something deeper, but he couldn't deny that they had. There was something about her combination of strength and compassion, her intelligence and her quiet determination, that drew him like nothing he'd experienced before. Yet alongside these growing feelings was the shadow of his condition. Though Lydia had been more optimistic than the Kansas City doctor about his ability to father children, Orion couldn't shake the fear that any future with her would be incomplete. The thought of offering her less than a whole life, of depriving her of the chance to be a mother, weighed heavily on him. These thoughts were still circling in his mind on Sunday as he prepared for Lydia's visit. He'd spent the morning cleaning the small ranch house, which was simple but sound, 3 rooms downstairs and 2 small bedrooms upstairs. The previous owner had left most of the furniture, which Orion had scrubbed and polished until it gleamed. For dinner, he'd prepared a stew from a recipe his mother had taught him years ago, one of the few tangible connections he still had to his family. Fresh bread from town completed the meal, along with a bottle of wine he'd splurged on for the occasion. When he heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, Orion stepped out onto the porch, his heart quickening at the sight of Lydia driving a small buggy up the dusty path to the house. She wore a dress of deep green that complemented her eyes, her hair arranged more elaborately than he'd ever seen it, with small flowers tucked into the braids. "This is lovely," she said as he helped her down from the buggy, her eyes taking in the whitewashed house with its neat porch and the sprawling pastures beyond. "You've already made progress." "The men I hired have been working hard," Orion acknowledged. "There's still plenty to do, but it's starting to feel like somewhere a person could live." He offered her his arm, and she took it naturally, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. Inside, she exclaimed over the cozy sitting room with its stone fireplace, running her fingers appreciatively over the polished dining table where he'd set out their meal. "You've gone to a lot of trouble," she observed, a pleased flush coloring her cheeks. "Wanted to make a good impression," Orion admitted, suddenly feeling awkward. "Though I'm no gourmet cook." "It smells wonderful," Lydia assured him, "and I'm famished." Dinner passed pleasantly, their conversation flowing easily from town news to Orion's plans for the ranch to Lydia's most interesting recent patients. As they lingered over the wine, the setting sun cast golden light through the windows, illuminating Lydia's face in a way that made Orion's breath catch. "I have something I need to say," he found himself saying, setting down his glass. "Something that's been on my mind." Lydia's expression grew serious as she met his gaze. What is it? These past weeks, getting to know you, I felt something I never expected to feel. Orion paused, gathering his courage. I care for you, Lydia, more than I thought possible. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. I care for you too, Orion, she said softly. But there's more to it, he continued, needing to get the words out. My condition, what we discussed when we first met, it complicates things. If what the doctor in Kansas City said is true, I can't give you children. And you deserve that, a complete family. Lydia was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Do you remember what I told you about that diagnosis? She finally asked. Orion nodded. You said it wasn't certain, that the body can heal in unexpected ways. I meant that, Lydia said firmly. But even if it were absolutely true, do you think that would change how I feel about you? Shouldn't it? Orion asked, his voice rough with emotion. Don't you want children someday? Of course I do, Lydia acknowledged. But there are many ways to create a family. And besides, she reached across the table to take his hand. I meant what I said. Professionally, I believe there's a chance. Your body has already shown remarkable healing capacity with this latest injury. The hope in her voice was almost too much to bear. I don't want you to be disappointed, Orion said quietly. The only thing that would disappoint me, Lydia replied, squeezing his hand, would be if you let fear of what might not happen prevent us from discovering what could be. Her words struck him with the force of revelation. She was right, he had been letting fear dictate his choices, holding back because of what might never be rather than embracing what was right in front of him. I'm not very good at this, he admitted. Been on my own too long, I suppose. But I'd like to court you properly if you're willing. The smile that blossomed across Lydia's face was answer enough, but she nodded anyway. I'm more than willing, Orion Sutton. In fact, I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever ask. The months that followed were the happiest of Orion's life. As summer faded into autumn, he and Lydia fell into a rhythm. She continued her medical practice in town, while he worked to build his ranch into something sustainable. Several evenings a week, they would share dinner, either at the ranch or in Lydia's small apartment above her office. On Sundays, they often rode out together, exploring the surrounding countryside. Their courtship was not without challenges. There were still moments when Orion's doubts resurfaced, when he questioned whether he had the right to ask Lydia to build a life with him given the uncertainty of his condition. But each time, she met his fears with steady confidence, reminding him that their future held possibilities beyond what either of them could imagine. As winter approached, Orion's ranch began to take shape. He had acquired a small herd of cattle, hired a young cowhand named Miguel to help manage them, and completed most of the necessary repairs to the buildings and fences. The house, too, had been transformed, with new curtains that Lydia had helped select, comfortable furniture, and shelves filled with books that they both enjoyed. It was on a crisp November evening, with the first snow of the season beginning to fall outside, that Orion finally found the courage to ask the question that had been building in his heart. They were sitting before the fireplace, Lydia curled against his side as they read together, when he set aside his book and turned to face her. Lydia, he began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. These past months have been the best of my life. You've shown me that there's more to living than just surviving, that there's joy in building something lasting. She sat up straighter, her eyes intent on his face. Orion. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small box he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. I don't have much to offer except this ranch and my heart, but both are yours if you want them. Lydia Blackburn, will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes as she took the box, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small emerald that matched her eyes. Yes, she breathed, looking up at him with so much love it nearly overwhelmed him. Yes, I will marry you, Orion Sutton. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the snow falling more heavily outside, Orion felt a certainty he'd never known before. Whatever the future held, children or no children, they would face it together, and that was enough. They were married on Christmas Day in the small church in Tahlequah, with nearly the entire town in attendance. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. The reception afterward a joyous celebration that lasted well into the evening. When they finally made their way back to the ranch, now their home, the night was clear and cold. Stars scattered like diamonds across the winter sky. "Happy?" Orion asked as he carried his bride across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in their sitting room, where a fire had been laid ready for their return. "Completely," Lydia assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "And you, more than I ever thought possible," he admitted, drawing her close. Their life together settled into a rhythm as winter gave way to spring. Lydia continued her medical practice, though she reduced her hours slightly to spend more time at the ranch. Orion's herd grew as calves were born, and he hired another hand to help with the increased workload. It was Lydia who suggested converting one of the outbuildings into a small clinic, where she could see patients from the surrounding farms who found it difficult to make the journey into town. Together, they cleaned and painted the building, installed windows for better light, and equipped it with the necessary supplies. "It's perfect," Lydia declared when they had finished, standing in the doorway of the bright, clean space. "Now people won't have to wait until they're desperately ill to seek help." Orion watched her as she moved around the room, making final adjustments to the arrangement of supplies, her face animated with purpose. In moments like these, he marveled at how fortunate he was to have found her, to have this life he'd never dared to dream of. Their physical relationship had deepened over the months of their marriage, each of them learning the other's body with tender attention. Though they had never explicitly tried to conceive a child, both understanding the likely futility given Orion's condition, neither had they taken steps to prevent it. So when, one morning in late summer, Lydia approached him as he sat at the breakfast table, her face a mixture of shock and joy, Orion felt his heart stutter in his chest. "Orion," she said softly, taking his hands in hers, "I think I'm quite certain, actually, that I'm going to have a baby." The words didn't register at first, seemed to hover in the air between them like something unreal. "A baby?" he repeated, his voice barely audible. "But the doctor said, I told you the body can heal in ways we don't always understand," Lydia reminded him, a tremulous smile lighting her face. "I've been feeling unwell for several weeks now, the nausea in the mornings, fatigue, certain changes. All the signs point to pregnancy." Orion stood up so quickly his chair fell backward, pulling Lydia into his arms with a whoop of joy that startled their dog sleeping by the hearth. "A baby," he repeated, this time with wonder rather than disbelief. "Our baby." Lydia laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Our miracle," she corrected gently. News of their impending parenthood spread quickly through Tahlequah, met with congratulations and, from some quarters, barely disguised surprise. The Kansas City doctor's prognosis had become something of an open secret in the small community, making Lydia's pregnancy seem all the more miraculous to those who knew. "Always said that woman was a healer beyond the ordinary," Mrs. Finch declared when she came to visit, bringing a basket of baby clothes she had begun knitting. "If anyone could make the impossible happen, it would be our Dr. Blackburn, or should I say, Dr. Sutton now." Orion watched in amazement as Lydia's body changed, her slender frame gradually swelling to accommodate their growing child. Despite her medical knowledge, or perhaps because of it, she approached her pregnancy with a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound wonder, documenting every change and development. "Feel this?" she would say, guiding his hand to her rounded belly where their child kicked and rolled. "That's a foot, I think, or possibly an elbow." The winter passed in a blur of preparations. Orion converted the smaller of the upstairs bedrooms into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands and painting the walls a soft yellow. Lydia sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her needle flashing in the firelight as she created practical but beautiful clothes for their expected child. It was during one such evening, with Lydia sitting in her rocking chair by the fire, that she first felt the contractions begin. "Orion," she said calmly, though her face had gone pale, "I think the baby is coming." Orion looked up from the harness he was repairing, his heart suddenly racing. "Now? But it's too early, you said spring. Babies don't always follow our schedules." Lydia replied with a small smile that turned into a grimace as another contraction gripped her. "We need to send for Martha." Martha Wilson was the midwife who had agreed to attend Lydia's birth, an older woman with decades of experience delivering the children of Tahlequah. Orion rushed to saddle his horse, leaving Miguel in charge as he rode hard for town through the cold February night. By the time he returned with Martha, Lydia's labor had intensified. She had moved to their bedroom, where she paced slowly, pausing to brace herself against the bed frame when contractions came. "You're doing fine, Dr. Sutton," Martha assured her after a brief examination. "Baby's in the right position, and your body's opening up just as it should." Orion hovered uncertainly, torn between wanting to stay at Lydia's side and feeling like an intruder in this intensely female domain. "Should I go?" he asked, looking between the two women. "Don't you dare," Lydia said firmly, reaching for his hand. "I need you here." And so he stayed, supporting Lydia as she labored through the night, holding her when the pain became overwhelming, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, and reminding her to breathe when she forgot. Dawn was breaking when Martha announced, "I can see the head. Just a few more pushes, Lydia." Orion watched in awe as his wife gathered her remaining strength, her face contorted with effort as she brought their child into the world with a final, tremendous push. "A boy!" Martha exclaimed as the newborn's cry filled the room. "A fine, strong boy." But even as she laid the infant on Lydia's chest, her expression changed, her hands returning to Lydia's abdomen. "There's another one," she said, her voice tight with surprise. "Lydia, you need to push again, there's a second baby coming." "Twins," Orion gasped, looking from Martha to Lydia in disbelief. Lydia, exhausted but determined, nodded. "It explains why I was larger than expected," she managed before another contraction seized her. The second birth came more quickly than the first, and within minutes, Martha was holding another crying infant. "A girl this time," she announced, placing the second baby beside her brother on Lydia's chest. Orion sank to his knees beside the bed, overwhelmed by what he had just witnessed. Two babies, a son and a daughter, where he had once been told he would have none at all. "They're perfect," he whispered, gently touching their tiny heads, each crowned with a wisp of dark hair like his own. "Absolutely perfect." Lydia looked up at him, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "Twins," she murmured. "I had no idea. My examinations never suggested." "Two miracles instead of one," Orion said, his voice thick with emotion. "What shall we call them?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had never settled on final choices. Now, looking at their unexpected pair of children, Lydia smiled. "James for the boy after my father, and Elizabeth for the girl after your mother." "James and Elizabeth Sutton," Orion repeated, the names feeling right on his tongue. "Our children." The news of the Sutton twins spread through Tahlequah like wildfire, the improbability of their existence only adding to the sensation. Visitors began arriving almost immediately, bearing gifts and good wishes, their faces alight with the desire to witness this small miracle for themselves. Dr. Mitchell's successor, a young man named Frederick Palmer who had taken over Lydia's practice in town when her pregnancy had made travel difficult, came to examine both mother and babies, declaring them healthy and strong. "Remarkable," he said, shaking his head as he packed away his instruments. "Simply remarkable. Given your medical history, Orion, the chances of this happening were... well, I wouldn't have thought it possible." "That's what the doctor in Kansas City said?" Orion replied with a smile, cradling Elizabeth in his arms while Lydia nursed James. "But Lydia always believed otherwise." "And you were right," Palmer said, turning to Lydia with professional respect. "This will make quite a case study, if you ever choose to write it up for a medical journal." The first weeks with the twins were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and precious little sleep. Orion took over as much of the ranch work as he could manage, leaving Miguel and the other hands to handle the rest while he supported Lydia through the early days of motherhood. Despite her medical training, Lydia found herself learning alongside Orion as they navigated the challenges of caring for two newborns at once. When both babies cried simultaneously in the middle of the night, or when one would finally settle just as the other began to fuss, they sometimes looked at each other with a mixture of exhaustion and humor that bordered on hysteria. "Did you ever imagine this?" Lydia asked one night as they sat together in the nursery, each holding a sleeping twin. "When you were driving cattle across the plains, did you ever picture yourself here?" Orion considered the question, looking down at James's peaceful face, then across at Elizabeth in Lydia's arms. "Never," he admitted. "I didn't allow myself to imagine this kind of happiness. Didn't think it was meant for men like me. And now, Orion said softly, "I can't imagine any other life." As winter gave way to spring and then summer, the twins grew stronger and more alert, their personalities beginning to emerge. James was the more serious of the two, watching the world with solemn dark eyes, while Elizabeth was quicker to smile, her curiosity evident in every movement. Lydia gradually resumed her medical practice, first seeing patients at their ranch clinic, then making occasional trips into town when the twins were old enough to be left with Orion or their newly hired nanny, a gentlewoman named Sarah who had lost her own family to influenza the previous year. The ranch prospered as well. Orion's careful management and hard work paid off in a healthy herd and good harvests from the fields they had planted. By the time the twins celebrated their first birthday, a joyous occasion attended by what seemed like half the county, the Sutton Ranch had become one of the most successful in the area. "You've built something remarkable here," Sheriff Watson commented as he watched the birthday celebration. Now a family man himself with a young wife and a baby on the way. "Both of you." "We've been blessed," Orion acknowledged, his gaze finding Lydia across the yard where she stood laughing with Mrs. Finch, Elizabeth on her hip while James toddled at her feet. "More than I ever deserved." "Nonsense," the sheriff replied firmly. "If any man deserved happiness, it's you, Sutton. Saved my son's life that day, and nearly lost your own doing it. The good Lord has a way of recognizing such sacrifices." Perhaps he was right, Orion thought as he crossed the yard to join his family. Perhaps there was a grand design at work, one that had brought him to Tahlequah at precisely the moment he needed to be there, that had placed a bullet in exactly the right spot to bring Lydia into his life, that had defied medical odds to give them the twins. Or perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps it was just the natural outcome of two people who refused to accept limitations, who believed in possibilities rather than certainties, who chose hope over fear. "There you are," Lydia said as he reached her side, her face lighting up in the way that still made his heart skip even after 2 years together. "James wants to show you something." Orion crouched down to his son's level, watching as the boy carefully balanced on unsteady legs, then took 3 determined steps forward before collapsing into his father's waiting arms. "Well done, James," Orion exclaimed, lifting the boy high as he squealed with delight. "You'll be running before we know it." "And then we'll never catch them," Lydia predicted with a laugh, shifting Elizabeth to her other hip. One mobile twin was challenge enough, two will be impossible. We'll manage, Orion assured her, drawing her close with his free arm. Together, we can handle anything. And as he stood there surrounded by friends and neighbors, his son in his arms and his wife and daughter at his side, Orion Sutton knew with absolute certainty that it was true. The life he had once thought impossible had become his reality, not without challenges, not without hard work, but filled with a joy he had never dared to dream of. That night, after the guests had gone and the twins were asleep in their cribs, Orion and Lydia stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the stars that spangled the summer sky. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Lydia asked, leaning against him. "When you came to see Dr. Mitchell and found me instead?" "Often," Orion admitted, his arm tightening around her waist. "If I'd arrived a week earlier or later, if I'd decided not to seek a second opinion at all, everything would be different. Or if you hadn't jumped in front of that bullet," Lydia added softly. "I sometimes think that was the real turning point. That second injury, so close to the first it's not in any medical textbook. But I believe it somehow created the conditions for healing." Orion considered this. "So you're saying that getting shot was the best thing that ever happened to me?" Lydia laughed, the sound as bright and clear as the stars above them. "When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous. But yes, in a way." "Well," Orion said thoughtfully, "I wouldn't recommend it as a general cure, but I can't argue with the results." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the occasional soft murmur from the nursery where their children slept. "I was thinking," Lydia said eventually, "about expanding the clinic. There's enough demand now, and with the railroad coming through next year, the town will only grow." Orion nodded. "I've been considering adding to the herd as well. The new pasture we fenced last fall is ready, and prices are good right now. We're building something lasting, aren't we?" Lydia mused, looking up at him. "For the twins, and for ourselves." "We are," Orion agreed, turning to face her fully. "And speaking of the twins, I was wondering if you might consider giving them a brother or sister someday." "Not right away," he added hastily, "but when they're a bit older." Lydia's smile was luminous in the moonlight. "I'd like that very much, though perhaps we should hope for just one at a time next round." "Agreed," Orion laughed, drawing her close. "One miracle at a time is plenty." As they stood together under the vast Oklahoma sky, the ranch quiet around them and their children sleeping peacefully inside, Orion reflected on the journey that had brought him here from a wounded, solitary cowboy convinced he would never have a family, to a husband and father blessed beyond measure. Life had a way of surprising you, he thought as he led his wife back inside to their warm, waiting bed. And sometimes, the greatest surprises came wrapped in the smallest packages, like twin babies who weren't supposed to exist, born to a man who'd been told he would never be a father. And that, Orion decided as he closed the door against the night, was the most beautiful surprise of all. 3 years later, the Sutton Ranch had grown to become one of the most prosperous in the territory. The twins, now 4 years old, were joined by a younger brother, Thomas, whose arrival had been less dramatic but no less joyous than theirs. Lydia's clinic had expanded to include a small hospital wing, where she now trained 2 young women as nurses, passing on her knowledge and skills with the same passion that had driven her own medical education. Orion, watching his family gather on the porch one golden evening in autumn, marveled at how completely his life had been transformed. James and Elizabeth chased each other around the yard, their laughter mingling with the soft cooing of baby Thomas in Lydia's arms. "Papa, watch me," Elizabeth called, her dark curls bouncing as she climbed onto the porch railing, preparing to jump off. "Careful, Lizzie," Orion cautioned, moving quickly to spot her as she leaped fearlessly into the air, catching her with practiced ease. James, not to be outdone, scrambled up next, his expression serious as he calculated the distance. "Me too, Papa." And as Orion caught his son, feeling the solid weight of him land safely in his arms, he thought about all the times he'd been told what wasn't possible and how little those pronouncements had mattered in the end. Because here, in this place he'd made with Lydia, surrounded by the children they'd created together against all odds, Orion Sutton had found a truth more powerful than any medical diagnosis. Love, given freely and received with an open heart, could work miracles that defied explanation. And that was a lesson worth passing on to his children, and to theirs after them, a legacy more valuable than any ranch or clinic or material possession could ever be. "Again, Papa," Elizabeth demanded, already climbing back onto the railing for another jump. "Again?" Orion agreed with a smile, opening his arms to catch her once more, ready for whatever came next in this extraordinary, ordinary life they'd built together.